Well, lads, here we are today to talk about the sport that we love so dearly and the athletes that make up this sport. Personally, the fighters that we have in MMA kind of show that you don't need to be that athletic to be successful in the sport. And to be honest, I will say in the lower weight classes, flyweight, bantamweight, featherweight, lightweight, and welterweight, you do require more athleticism in these divisions. So I would consider the people in these divisions more athletes. But when we start getting to the top heavy guys, middleweight, light heavy, and especially heavyweight, this is where we kind of see athleticism go out the window and just pure power and aggression take over. And I started to think of this because the current UFC roster is made up of mostly jobbers and people that couldn't make it in other sports. Because to be honest, if you could make it in boxing, in another sport like professional football or basketball, would you really want to make 20 and 20 to fight in MMA? Yeah, I wouldn't think so. But I started to think, why is it these people in MMA aren't that athletic? And I decided to go back and look at the first UFC. Now, UFC 1, or as I like to call it, the BJJ multi-level pyramid scheme, had almost no grapplers in the entire competition. It was mostly just big chubby guys that didn't know much about fighting, or guys with accredited martial arts as street fighter, which just pretty much means urban scumbag. Anyway, most memorable people from the first UFC would be Hoist Gracie, the Gracie scammer, of course, Ken, the steroid monster Shamrock, Art Jimmerson, who, to be honest, I consider the most athletic person to compete in the first UFC. The only problem was he was a boxer without a clue about grappling. So he just got taken down by Hoist Gracie straight away and tapped to position. And Gerard Godot, the piece of shit kickboxer. Oh, yes, of course. We also had the sumo guy, but he was just pretty much going to be a fat guy that was expected to get kicked in the head. Now, the reason I don't think this kind of shows that people weren't that athletic, because Hoist Gracie was incredibly dominant in the first UFC as well as the first few UFCs. But I think this is mostly to do with the fact that he knew how to grapple and do submissions. In the first UFC, Ken Shamrock kind of knew about submissions, but it was pretty much leg locks and nothing else. And the build of Hoist Gracie was pretty much someone's accountant because the guy did not look intimidating at all. It was kind of just to, in the words of the Gracies, demonstrate Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. But it was pretty much that if you fight someone without them knowing what you're going to do, you can win. Shocker, I know. But this kind of summed up the first UFC and the first few UFCs. And it kind of brought in the next era of MMA, which is talking about the dad bod era, or the barroom brawler. And this one we had Dan the Stash Severn, Don, the American man, the man's man, Fry, and Tank Beerbelly Abbott. No, Dan Severn was a pretty good fighter, but all he knew was how to wrestle. So pretty much I wouldn't consider him too much of a mixed MMA athlete because he never really knew how to strike, except for that one fight where he struck with Ken Shamrock and he almost got arrested. Don Fry was just pretty much someone that was very big, very strong, and had some understanding of grappling and striking. But to call him a real athlete would be a bit disingenuous. He was more just someone that would have been happy fighting in a bar for $20. Uh, and the UFC was just a way to make a little bit more money doing that. And Tank Abbott, he was just like the complete opposite of an athlete. He looks like the kind of guy they found at a bar 20 minutes before the event who just finished drinking his beer, being like, yeah, I could do that, no problem. But if the fight went longer than 30 seconds, Tank would just pretty much gas straight away. This is kind of begin defining the early stages of MMA, which kind of show that you didn't really need to be that athletic. And then we get on, which kind of illustrates onto our next era of MMA, which was the Brawlers era. Now here things start to look a little bit better towards athleticism, but still not great. Because obviously we had Chuck, Tito, Randy Couture, Vitor Belfort, and the greatest UFC champion of all time, Tim Sylvia. But yeah, here it was just getting a little bit of a brawler. We want to get CTE era because Chuck had the old hands down, chin up striking defense, and he was good, But to be honest, with the lifestyle he led, he wasn't the most athletic guy because all he could really do is barrage you with punches in the first 2 rounds. But if you got beyond that, you had a decent chance of beating him. With Tito, he wasn't true athletic either. His game plan was pretty much just get you to the ground, pin you in a position, and do ground and pound, which is a successful way to win an MMA fight. But when we look at the athleticism involved, it wasn't too much. It just required him being bigger than his opponent. Anybody that Tito fought that was actually comparative and comparable in size to him, he usually lost. And that's just how it went for Tito's career. And then we have Randy, the synthetic couture. This is where things started to change a little bit because he was actually the first person I would kind of consider an athlete because he was an Olympian and on the Olympic team. But the thing is, he was in his late 30s and early 40s and facing guys in their 20s and early 30s. And he was dominating these guys, which kind of shows the time that one, the skill level just wasn't really there. And two, the athleticism still wasn't there, even getting this far 10, 15 years into MMA as a sport overall. We had Vitor Belfort as well, who was just pretty much a science experiment. Whatever new fluids they come up with in the lab, they put straight into him, which enhances athleticism a lot. And to be fair, every MMA fighter is probably on steroids, so I can't really defend it being like, oh, he only looked good because he was on steroids. He did look good, but his technique wasn't the best. He was kind of just a striker with some jiu-jitsu. To call him well-rounded wouldn't be very would be disingenuous. And then we had Tim Sylvia, who literally took steroids to try and make himself look better. At this time with Tim Sylvia, I think the UFC were literally signing people to make their professional debuts, like Cain Velasquez, to fight Tim Sylvia, just because they were so sick and tired of having him around. He was pretty much promotional death when you saw Tim Sylvia step into the ring. But anyway, this is where we started getting into a little bit more of the dark era of MMA. But after this, I think comes the first and best era of MMA in that we've seen, and this is of the elite era. This is where we start to see GSP, Anderson Silva, John Jones, and Kane and JDS. GSP for me is actually the first athlete the UFC has ever seen. Someone that actually takes conditioning very seriously, as well as being trained to be well rounded as a fighter. GSP, although he had some extremely boring decisions throughout his career, could easily go 25 minutes hard. Well, not hard, but go 25 minutes without slowing down and was comfortable fighting anywhere the fight went. On the ground, standing up in the clinch, GSP was pretty much dominant in this whole time. Again, was it steroids? Probably. Was he an athlete? Most definitely. We had Anderson Silva, who again wasn't the most athletic, wasn't the most well-rounded fighter either. Yes, he was a fantastic striker. He had some very, very good jiu-jitsu, but his wrestling was always extremely sus. The first time he actually went up against proper wrestlers, people that use wrestling in their game plans to win fights, Chael Sonnen and Chris Weidman, he actually came very close to losing with Chael and also lost to Chris. It doesn't show to me that he was very well rounded and a great athlete, but he's the first guy that was actually able to strike in different ways: long range, short range, and in the clinch. So I think Anderson kind of showed this is a term where people started to become a little bit more athletic because of this. Of course, we had John Jones, the first genetically gifted juice box, who pretty much proved that if you're genetically gifted and take a lot of steroids, you can be the greatest of all time. With this, I think John Jones was probably the first proper light heavyweight that the UFC has ever seen. Because he was 6'4" with an 80-inch reach advantage, and he's just extremely long and elusive, and is also a very good wrestler. Mixed with couple that with a lot of steroids, you have the greatest of all time, pretty much. And this is when light heavyweights was pretty much big fat guys that couldn't be arsed, couldn't middleweight. But this is actually beginning to make a new step as well towards the heavyweight division because the first time we actually seen the heavyweight division, people in their primes fighting and not being a couple of tubby blokes. Because before this we had Brock Lesnar, Randy Couture, and Tim Sylvia. But now with Kane and JDS, it actually became people that look like proper athletes, not just guys who walked out of a bar. Yeah, for me, I think this is probably the golden era of MMA when things actually started to become less of a barroom fight and more of an actual sport. And this actually bounces us on to the modern era with guys such as Ilia Topuria, Alex Pereira, Merab Dvalishvili, Islam Makhachev. These, I think, are the most athletic of all the champions that we currently have in MMA. Obviously, Alex Pereira comes from kickboxing, which I think kind of illustrates my point more because he's just been beating up most of the middleweight and light heavyweight division. People say it's because of his good striking. I think it's one, because of his good striking, obviously, but two, he's more of an athlete than some of these other guys are. Like, if we compare him to some of the people that he's fought recently, like Jamal Hill, who literally looks like a fat guy, Jan Blakovic, who looks like someone that could be working in a factory, and as well as that, when he fought Sean Strickland, who is pretty much just a psycho meth dealer that managed to make it in MMA. But because of his athleticism that he brought over from kickboxing and treating it like a real sport, he has actually proved that MMA guys are not that athletic and don't take the sport seriously. And of course, we take this as well with Ilia Taporia, who, again, for the lighter weight divisions, Ilia, Marav, and Islam, these guys are actually required to be athletic. When you're a big guy, you can just rely on your power. These guys actually require conditioning because usually fights, especially at lower weight classes, tend to go for longer rounds. And Marav has some of the best cardio I've ever seen in MMA. Could it be enhanced? Probably. Is everyone on steroids? Most definitely. So I think that's actually how this goes. But I'm not saying that all the people now in the UFC, especially the champions, are extremely athletic, because of course we have the non-athletes. We have Bilal, who pretty much shows that if you're willing to put in the work and keep grinding, you can become champion. It won't be entertaining. Nobody will like you, but hey, you'll get there in the end. So why not? If it works for you, it works for you. But to call Bilal Muhammad athletic is extremely disingenuous because the man literally looks like he throws punches underwater and he just dives for your legs as soon as he can. Then we have DDP, who to me makes absolutely no sense as a fighter because his technique is sloppy, his conditioning looks terrible, but he consistently outconditions, outpaces, and outperforms people. I think this proves that if you're just super confident that you're just going to win, you win because there's no other reason to explain DDP's victories because the guy isn't that athletic, if we're being honest. And he's just pretty much chatting it and getting wins through it. And I know I said before about John Jones being the first athlete, but this was young John Jones. Now we get fat old man John Jones. This is when he becomes fatty, no natty anymore. And yeah, he just become a fat old man. Like in his last fight, he didn't even look that impressive against Gane. Obviously, yes, he was able to do a little bit of striking. He went for the legs, but submitting someone like Cyril Gane isn't the most difficult thing in the world. I think most heavyweights that have any grappling could probably, if they could get Cyril to the ground, would be able to submit him. And this kind of shows it because, especially in the heavyweight division, there is almost no athleticism because the biggest prospects that we've actually seen come through the heavyweight division have been Tom Aspinall and Cyril Gane in the last few years. And I think it's because these guys are actual athletes. Tom, who's been training in MMA since he was a very young boy and continues to do so, and Cyril, who had actually practiced multiple other sports before starting with MMA. These guys kind of show that if you have any athleticism, you can go super far in the heavyweight division. Because most of the heavyweight division is literally just made up of guys that go partying every weekend and are on the piss and don't take this sport seriously. I mean, if we even just look at the rankings, obviously we have John Jones, who's the interim champ, Tom Aspinall, who's the real champ. But then we started looking down. Outside of maybe the top three, there's not that guys that are really that athletic. Like obviously Tom, athlete, Cyril, athlete. Alexander Volkov, he's a very good athlete and a very good fighter, but he can just never perform when he needs to. He can beat anyone on any given night, but most nights he's just not able to switch it on. We have Sergey Pavlovich, who a lot of people would have considered a very good athlete, but has actually fallen off recently. And yeah, the thing is, when it's his cardio that kind of does it for me, because it seems to be can't get you out of there in the first round. If you can get to the second round with Sergey Pavlovich, you have a very good chance of going the distance. And if you're able to keep him at bay, you could win it by a decision. But after this, who do you really have? Like Curtis Blades, really? Like he's not too athletic. Yes, he used to be a wrestler, but he's just a kind of a power puncher now. Jason Almeida, who's just a bored jiu-jitsu guy, pretty much. Then after that, what? Sergey Spavich. some fat guy, Eurizio Rosenstruck. Again, another big fat guy that just literally stands on the outside and throws a kick, and maybe he knocks you out. And then we have the disgraces, the Derek Lewis's, the Tai Tuivasas, and of course Alexander Romanov. To be honest, it just kind of proved my point that I think if anybody, big fat guy, started training MMA for 2 to 3 years, you got maybe a 4 or 5 fight win streak, the UFC would sign you to heavyweight because they are literally dying with some of these contenders. Outside of the top three, who really is there in the heavyweight division that's that athletic? Not really anybody. I don't know. Would you agree with me on this? If you don't, that's fine. That's your opinion. It's wrong, obviously, because my opinion's always right. But let me know what you think down below. Like, subscribe, do all that good stuff, or don't. I don't really care. And I'll see you guys next time.